So I think we may be live now. So good morning to people who are joining us and coming in. Thank you for giving up your Friday morning to be here with me to share some thoughts and ideas as we're going through in terms of this pandemic. My name is Adrian Ashton, and as you might be able to hear, there's a bit of building work going on the adjoining site to where we live at the moment. So if there's any background noise, I do apologise for that. Hopefully it won't distract too much from your enjoyment of what's going in. So as I say, my name is Adrian Ashton, and a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a white paper called Making Sense of It All 6 months in. And the idea of that paper was to try and reflect on how different sectors and industries had collectively been impacted by the pandemic, the shocks to their different systems, and how they were all starting to respond. And the reason for doing that was because it struck me that there were lots of papers coming out from think tanks, policymakers, all starting to capture data and think about what it meant for them. So there were papers coming out about poverty. What's the impact of lockdown on poverty? Other papers about small businesses, other papers about employment, and that's all absolutely fine and appropriate. The difficulty is, though, we don't live and work according to a single issue. Some of us may be living in poverty and worried about our future employment. Some of us may be small business owners and worried about the impact on the future of the high street. So my thought was, wouldn't it be better to take more of an integrated collective view on all of this? So how has industry reacted? How have charities reacted? How have local communities reacted and been impacted as they go along as well? And that's not me based on me thinking I know it all and I've got these great ideas, but rather it was based on my own personal experiences since February, really, of being approached and being asked to support colleges, business support agencies, local charities, community groups, schools, and others all start to reflect on and think about how are we feeling about this lockdown and the pandemic, and how should we best respond and react to it? So it struck me that, but no one was talking to anyone else. They were all saying their own thing in their own little worlds. So the idea of the white paper I put together, called Making Sense of It All 6 months in, was hopefully to offer people a wider perspective. 6 months in, we're all starting to catch our breath. We had the first kind of coming out of the lockdown period. People were starting to feel optimistic for the future again. And it just seemed the right time to say, try and draw a breath, pause, reflect, and think about what we might do next. We know how we felt, but we know what we've done, but was it the right thing? What can we do? So the white paper was there to say, you've done all these great things. Now just compare and contrast to how other people have done their things, so you can have more confidence and creativity and feel braver about what you do in the next 6 months. And rather than just putting it out as a blog, I wanted to kind of test some of the assumptions within this. So I put it out as a white paper and I stuck it on a website. And I said, okay, here's the link. And the idea was that I asked people to say, just give me your email address and I'll set up an autoresponder. So put your email address in, confirm your email address, and then you should be sent a copy of the paper. And that was to give me an insight into who's interested in this. Is this something which anyone might be interested in? And my goodness, were people interested? There's scores of people pumped in your email addresses, and I promise I'm not using it to spam you. Okay, there's anything you get from me, you can always unsubscribe or ask me to delete. But from those different email addresses, it became apparent to me that this paper, these reflections, are of interest to everyone. I have local councillors and council officers, leaders of businesses, people in other countries, universities, charities, grant-making trusts, people just living on ordinary lives, thinking, well, I'm trying to make sense of it. Where do I go next? So I'm encouraged for all of you who offered an interest in the paper originally, because actually this is something that hits on all of us. We're all being impacted, and actually all of us are trying to muddle our way through this. So what I wanted to do this morning in this live stream was to share initially some of the feedback I got, because again, everyone who took the paper all took the time to read it. It's quite short, it's still out there, and everyone offered feedback. They all had a view. They all said, this is what I thought of it. This is how it was useful. This is where I think it hits upon a nerve. This is where I think it could go next. So the idea of that was to share that with you, because you all read the paper in isolation. Some of you maybe had a chat with your colleagues about it, but this is a chance to put back out to the wider world, all of you, some of the key themes that came out of your feedback collectively. And then after that, I want to touch upon some of the ideas for what comes next, because the paper was written, as I say, a few weeks ago. Since then, more information has come out, more things have become apparent. We've got new learning and new insight. So I wanted to add a few extra thoughts as a kind of a bonus content onto that as well. So first up, what did people think of it? So lots of individual comments, but the broad themes seem to come out under three areas. Area number one, the money. So lockdown happened and suddenly we were worried about our jobs. We were worried about being able to pay the bills if we were an organization. And my goodness, so many grant-making bodies, to a greater or lesser extent, local authorities and government as well, all stepped up and said, we are going to stop everything and make cash available for projects and initiatives that support people who are being most affected through the lockdown and through having to self-isolate or shield themselves. So that response from grant-making bodies, and there's hundreds of them out there who did this, and too many for me to name check in a live stream, but you know who you are, was obviously really well received and absolutely fantastic. Great leadership in terms of what we need in our society. But my concern within that is in making that money available for these emergency interventions. All of those charities and community groups and organizations are now saying, but what do we do now? The emergency interventions are coming to an end. And as an organization, as a charity or a community group or a social enterprise, we don't have those services and those programs running now that we thought we would to help sustain us, to keep those core activities, those core strands of support and services and contact and outreach running into the future. So as we start to come out of the other side of the lockdowns and the pandemic into either later this year or sometime next year, the concern is quite a lot of charities, that social infrastructure, that community support points, are simply going to fall over and disappear and be lost. But that's not necessarily a cause for panic just yet, and I'll come back to that a bit later. But that's number one. Grant-making bodies, you all stepped up, you did great stuff. Number two, in the white paper, I shared a diagram called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's a simple triangle, and it's a way of trying to understand what makes us tick. How are we influenced by different external factors in making decisions and acting in a way that's in our own interests and actually helps us become more, become better, enjoy life more, and actually help out other people more. And it's a really simple model, and it's been around for decades. And if you want to look it up, it's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it seemed to catch time with a lot of people. Is yes, this kind of helps us make sense of why we're here. All this talk of build back better, regreen the economy, disrupt capitalism. So we had all those campaigns and conversations running during lockdown, and now they all seem to have gone very quiet. That's what's happened. And I think it's because we were all stuck. If you look at this model, it says, but during that period, and even now coming out, because of all the ongoing uncertainties, we don't feel secure to be able to invest in those longer term futures for us all, because we're still trying to feed ourselves, to keep our roofs over our heads, to keep ourselves safe, and stop ourselves becoming ill. So it's a really old model. It's almost cliche in some ways, but it strikes a chord that says, actually, although none of us have really lived through a global pandemic like this before, some of the tools, some of the ideas, some of the models that are out there on the shelves from all the old textbooks The really simple ideas are just as important, are equally relevant, and actually help us make more sense of all of this, help us feel that we can take some kind of control back, give us a sense of security in that sense. And the third thing, the third overarching strand of feedback that was coming back that, again, people seem to really appreciate was the encouragement that it wasn't just them. Charities tend to hang out with other charities. They don't tend to look at what's going on in the worlds of universities or academia. Universities don't tend to hang out and have lots of ongoing conversations with small business owners or people who are champions of the high streets. And so it goes. You tend to stick within your own worlds, and that's absolutely fine and understandable. So all they were hearing was their own bubble, their own echo chamber. Charities are struggling, we're all struggling, let's panic. But this paper that I put out that said, actually, it's not just you. Every sector, every type of industry are all being impacted, and we're all feeling the same way. So people seem to draw a lot of comfort from that in terms of where they go next and saying, at least it wasn't just us. We have that moral assurance. So those are the three themes of feedback that seem to come back to the paper as it initially went out. Funders, you've been great. Lots of emergency small grants becoming available. But from my perspective, what does that mean for the longer term future of those charities and community groups? Secondly, old models, the old theories, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all the others, they're very simple, they're very old, but they are really powerful and really useful in situations like this. And thirdly, that reassurance, being able to reach out and see all of us are struggling with this. There's a moral comfort and an assurance in that we're not on our own in it. People really seem to enjoy that. So that was the first part of what I wanted to cover this morning through this live stream. So I want to move on now to the next bit. So again, as we're going through, if you're watching this live, feel free to react, comment, post as we're going along. If there's any queries you want to put up in the comment box on the side, absolutely pop them in, and I'll try and pick them up as we go along. Hopefully Facebook will show them as we go, but if they don't, I'll try and pick up the comments afterwards and reply to you directly. So the second part, the addendum to making sense of it all 6 months in, because as I said, I wrote that white paper a few months ago, and since then, more things have come out and changed, including a doorbell ringing. So I'm going to have to ask you to excuse me for just a moment while I go and grab that parcel, because I don't want to get a missed delivery card. So thank you for your patience and bearing with me. I always say that one of the weird effects of working from home and the lockdown has been we should never have to come back to a missed delivery card on our doormats. So of course, true to form, in the middle of a live stream, the doorbell rings and there's a delivery. So thank you for bearing with me while I was able to go and grab it. So the second part of what I wanted to go through this morning with you, the addendum, what's come out next. So over the last few weeks, what are other information research is coming out that helps us all to make a bit more sense of the last 6 months, or the last 6 weeks after the last 6 months, and going next. And there's a few things I think that's coming out. One is we're all trying to figure this out ourselves, and there's no silver bullet. There's no magic one model that's going to fix this. Various researches and data sets show that there doesn't seem at this point to be any relationship between if a town or a city furloughed lots of employees or there are high infection rates, how the shopping is being affected, how the high street nighttime economy might come back. There's this idea of how communities are going to come back. Everyone's being affected differently. Every town or city, which we always knew this. Everywhere you live is special. It has unique features and characteristics. And what the pandemic and the lockdown have done have really brought those into focus and heightened them, which means, for example, whatever Birmingham's doing probably isn't going to work as brilliantly as it does for Birmingham in Newcastle. Whatever Liverpool is doing won't work as brilliantly or as effectively as it would in Leeds. Okay, so this is confusion again to say we're desperately trying to figure out what we do. We're looking to other people, and maybe the point in that is look to other areas, look to other organizations and communities about what they're doing, but don't copy them. Be inspired by them, adapt them. But we've all got to try and figure out what's right for us and our community. Because it's our community, not anyone else's. Okay, it's our people, it's our relationships, it's our neighbors. We need to work out what's right in our context. So, second thing, then, as well on that, in terms of an addendum, is thinking about how society is starting to change, the makeup of the sectors and the fabric of how services work. I mentioned earlier on this stream the fact that grant making trusts have been a fantastic job of helping charities, community groups, and to a point, even some small businesses put things in place as emergency responses for the people and communities who need the most activity, the most interest, the most attention, because they've been shielded, because they are at risk. And that's been great. But then there's a question now about what's the longer term future for these groups now, because what we're seeing in terms of the research and the data that's coming out now is quite a lot of charities are quite concerned that they're going to fall over. They're going to just simply have to wind up and cease to be by the end of the year. Latest figures that came out last week suggest that maybe as many as 50% of all charities, half of all the charities out there who have paid staff, who employ people to run the services, deliver the support, are currently budgeting to have to make up to half of those people redundant. So potentially 1 in 4 of everyone who works in charities and community groups may be facing redundancy by the end of the year. That's a huge withdrawal of activity and service and support in communities and groups of people who are still vulnerable coming out of the pandemic and coming out of lockdown. So there's a concern there about what gaps might start to appear next. But at the same time that charities are starting to kind of weaken and diminish, maybe, on the other side, we're seeing massive record breaking numbers of new businesses being formed and created. And these are businesses that beyond anything that we would expect to see in terms of the modeling that people are talking about. So we maybe starting to see the shift of something, which is it's not all on charities to pick up anymore. Businesses are starting to pick up more now. So maybe there's something about how the two collaborate more, work together more, coordinate and join those dots together. Maybe. It's, again, too well said, because again, all of this is changing all the time. We're figuring stuff out, we're finding stuff out, and we're having to change the way we think about this as we go. That's probably the addendum. Okay, everywhere's being affected differently. Everyone's response as a community, as a business, needs to be specific to you. There's no kind of that worked for them, so it worked for us. And actually, we're seeing maybe a fundamental shake-up in how communities support themselves, and not just from charities anymore. That there's this influx now of businesses coming into the mix alongside charities to work with them. That's be an interesting one to watch. But in terms of how you and I and all of us live through this, make sense of all this, it's all still massively unsettling. We're all still concerned about what's coming next and how should we respond? Should we hold on to our jobs? Should we save more money? Should we look to move away? What's the best thing to do? And when in times like this, as we go through times of shock and turbulence and panic, one of the things that sustains us, that helps us hold on to things properly, are our relationships with each other, our friendships, our family contacts. It's also referred to as social capital. Okay, so social capital refers to your friendships, your links with other people and communities, people you can talk to, people you can go to for advice and support when you're just feeling up against it. Now, the pandemic and the lockdown have made this kind of the relationships really weird, because not only is it harder to maintain contact with our existing friends, colleagues, neighbors, it's also really hard to make new contacts because we're not traveling around like we used to. We're not having those spontaneous, serendipitous water cooler moments in the office or in corridors or at train stations where we bump into people and strike up a conversation. So we're losing that kind of that new wave of how that all gets refreshed and coming up. And the other thing as well about this whole kind of world we're now living in in terms of our relationships with each other and our social capital is there's a kind of a weird tension going on in our heads all the time that I don't think enough of us have really thought about, which is anytime we go out anywhere and we see other people, we want to show solidarity because we are all on this same stormy sea together. And we want to show other people, yes, I'm here, I'm trying to figure it out too, and you're there, and it's a show of support and an encouragement because we're human beings. Okay, it's what we do. We're a social species. We band together. We want to show support for each other. So as we see people in real life out there in the world, say, hey, how are you? And nice to see you. But at the same time that we're trying to reach out to them as a show of mutual encouragement and solidarity, the back of our head is going, whoa, wait a minute. They might be sick. They might make you sick. So keep your distance. Don't trust them. So we've got this weird kind of dynamic going on in our heads all the time in the people we meet to say, keep your distance because they might be a carrier of something, even if it's not the virus, whatever you believe of the virus, there are other illnesses still going around. But at the same time, we want to show solidarity. We want to show support for them. So how do we reconcile that in our heads? It's a really awkward thing. And being British is difficult enough when you see people in the street for, oh, hello, how are you? And shall I go this way? And shall you go that way? And now we've got all of this other kind of messy head stuff going on as well. So the relationships we have are really kind of getting quite difficult to navigate, I think. So it's okay to feel confused. Okay, there's all this stuff going on. But the other thing in terms of thinking about this as well, and our relationships with each other and how we spend time together, how we work together, how we hang out together, because workplaces are starting to reopen. Schools are starting to go back. Community groups are starting to open up centres and halls and services again under guidance and distancing measures. And so we're seeing more people kind of coming back, picking up structured activities in their lives as employees, as volunteers and such like. And my concern is that we're in such a rush to give ourselves that. Remember what I said earlier, all of us have slightly different circumstances. One of you may be a parent with children. One of you may have older relatives that you're trying to care for. Some of you may have been quite ill before and you're worried about a relapse or whatever it is. We're all in different circumstances as we're facing this. There was an analogy someone shared a few months ago. We're not in the same boat. We are in different boats, but it's the same sea that we're on. So I think part of this is if you're able to carve out time and space with each other as you start to transition, you go back to working in offices, teaching in schools, and just find spaces and times to be able to be with each other and say, how are you finding it? What are you worried about next? To continue trying to show each other that solidarity and support, because the overarching message in all of this, I think, it seems to me, is we are all desperate for reassurance. We just need some kind of detail that says, yes, that gives us some stability. We can be certain of this because there's so much else changing all the time and so quickly. So that's the message I want to leave you with. So for those of you who took the original white paper, thank you very much for your interest. From my perspective, it seems to suggest that there's a real hunger and appetite for so many of us to want to make more sense of what we've been experiencing so we can be more confident about what we do next. And whatever other people are doing to work their way through this, that's great for them, but don't copy it straight off. Work out which bits of it are working for them and why, and how might that be able to work for you. And keep taking time to talk together to say, well, what are you concerned about? How do we work that? Because if you're managing a team or you're the owner of a business or you're a group of volunteers, you need to know you're supporting each other through this as well. So take time to properly understand where everyone's at. Now, that kind of takes us to the end of this live stream now. So thank you very much for being here as part of it. If you think there's been issues that you want to chat about further, please do feel free to message me. And I think if enough people kind of express an interest, I'd be very happy to convene a kind of a live group conversation about some of these ideas or themes as well. Nothing big or fancy. We'll probably do it on Zoom or something like that, and we'll work it that way. So I want to leave you with a kind of a wish, really. Now, rather than the kind of all the usual stuff, and for those of you who may know me, convention is not my thing. So I want to kind of leave you with a Star Trek wish. Now, some of you probably think, oh, Star Trek, that's the Vulcans, isn't it? Mr. Spock, live long and prosper. Okay. I'm not going to suggest that you live long and prosper. That's not my wish for you. My wish for you is still a Vulcan wish, but it's the response to live long and prosper. My wish for you, as you go out into the world, as you keep trying to make sense of it all yourself, is that you have peace and long life. I've been Adrian Ashton. Thanks for your time.